Welcome to the Lowdown on Cancer's Innovator series presented by Cancer Fund. Our guest is Dr. Anne-Marie Carbonell, CEO of OncoSynergy. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what motivated your involvement in the creation of this company?
My name's Anne-Marie Carbonell. I'm one of the original co-founders of OncoSynergy, as well as the Chief Executive Officer. A little bit about my background: I'm a physician. I went to medical school at St. Louis University, and then I trained in neurosurgery at the Cleveland Clinic. While I was at the Cleveland Clinic, I actually became a patient myself. I have a severe autoimmune disease. I now have a permanent pacemaker, and that really changed the trajectory of my career dramatically. But what I tell people is, more importantly, it taught me what it's like to be both a physician and a patient, and more specifically, a patient who is enrolled in a phase 1 trial. So I myself was enrolled in a trial at UCSF. So I've taken this knowledge of that unique dual perspective, along with the knowledge of seeing firsthand what it was like to treat patients suffering from one of the worst cancers, which is glioblastoma, which we'll talk more about. And that really drove my desire to figure out a way that I could still help that really critical patient population that I had made a huge commitment to. And I thought, there's no way that what we struggled with as neurosurgeons was the fact that we could not cure brain cancer with a scalpel. And so I thought, okay, this is the opportunity for me to really to do something that gives these patients another option, and that is, enter OncoSynergy. Before I actually got involved directly with the company, I did get experience in biotech through a few other companies. The majority of that experience came through a company called Microvention Terumo, where I designed intracranial stents to treat very difficult brain aneurysms. And that's where I learned the FDA approval process. I managed 2 very large pivotal trials. Each had 35 clinical trial sites. And so that's where I learned the regulatory sciences, some of the business aspect of biotech, and brought that knowledge of biotech, my physician experience, and my patient experience. And that all culminated in me taking on a formal position that I'm so lucky and proud to have at OncoSynergy.
That's awesome. And what problems specifically does your company address?
Sure. So, what we're really addressing is the fundamental problem with our current approach to cancer treatment, which ultimately leads to aggressive recurrence due to therapeutic resistance. So most modern and the best available cancer therapies that we have target what we call a single hallmark of cancer, or a single biological process that drives cancer progression and growth. And the issue with that is cancer cells are very smart. They're highly adaptable. And so they readily hijack other biological processes to ensure their survival. And so really what we're trying to do, the real problem is how we approach cancer, and we're taking a different approach.
That's awesome. And who specifically, and you've kind of addressed that already, it's obviously drug-resistant patients, or treatment-resistant patients. Who specifically experiences the problem you're addressing, and can you share an example story of someone?
Of course. So unfortunately, therapeutic resistance is the number 1 cause of death in oncology patients. So it really affects almost every cancer patient. I'm happy to take you through a good example. So from my neurosurgical career. So we often saw patients, 90% of glioblastoma patients become resistant to first-line therapy. Right. And the numbers are probably higher. So what we would do in the clinic is we would treat a patient with one of the few drugs we have in our arsenal. There's no standard of care for recurrence. One of them that we used often was called Avastin or bevacizumab. And Avastin targets the cancer hallmark or process of angiogenesis, or more simply put, new blood vessel formation. And what we saw is that it does its job really well. in the beginning, meaning it really does normalize the blood vessels, stop new blood vessel growth. But very, very rapidly, and we saw this actually live in the cell culture, these cancer cells become highly invasive. So what they do is they hijack another cancer hallmarker process, and that's typically the ability for cancer cells to invade tissue. And so we saw that with our naked eyes under a microscope, that all of a sudden these cells were highly mobile. They were invading through what we call the basement membrane, the level of the cellular architecture that kind of keeps their cells where we want them to and normally. And so we saw this over and over again, and the patients recurred rapidly. In fact, it was sort of an inevitability. And when we would treat with Avastin, we knew that this was the best therapy we had, but we always knew there was a time limit and to how long this would help. And we knew that it would not it would actually not improve overall survival. And so again and again, we saw these cancer patients come back. And when they came back, it wasn't just like a recurrence. They came back with a vengeance and with more difficult properties to treat. So this is a specific example across, glioblastoma, but this is a problem, unfortunately, that we see across multiple oncology indications.
Yeah. Yeah, especially glioblastoma. So
right.
Share with me, if you would, your solution, but as if you were speaking to a class of 8th graders.
Sure. So at OncoSynergy, our approach is to instead address the fundamental cancer driver. And for lack of better words, cancer's Achilles heel. So something so critical to cancer cells that we're able to cut off multiple of these biological processes simultaneously. So we are actually cutting off many of cancer's lifelines with a single therapeutic to prevent the ability for these cancer cells to sort of outsmart us and maneuver around our therapy. So we take, instead of a single hallmark approach or single biological approach, we're going and targeting a central cancer driver that allows us to combat multiple processes that cancer cells hijack simultaneously. And so our goal is, again, to really prevent cancer's ability to have an escape tactic or an escape mechanism. And so we identified the cancer's Achilles heel, or this fundamental cancer driver, in our target, which we call CD29. And what CD29 really is the key gatekeeper between cancer cells and their survival mechanism. So of course, it took a long time to find this, and we're really proud that we have. And now we've developed a therapeutic, so we call it an anti-CD29 therapeutic, against this target, against this fundamental gatekeeper. And so what it does is it really quarantines the cancer cell from its surrounding microenvironment. So just like humans, you and I, we're constantly influenced by our environment, right? Like it's constantly affecting us. And we've learned through studying cancer biology that the tumor microenvironment really drives those biological processes, or those cancer promoting hallmarks. So again, by antagonizing CD29, we're cutting off cancer from those growth supporting lifelines and causing cell death, and we're killing cancer that way.
Oh, that's very exciting. So can you give me an example of a use case of how your solution impacts the person having the problem?
Sure. So I'll go back again to glioblastoma and kind of take you through the history of a patient. So when you have a patient that presents with newly diagnosed glioblastoma, which is the most malignant primary brain cancer with a really dismal survival, there's one standard of care option, which is a chemotherapy called temozolomide, and we combine that with radiation therapy. We see that these patients will typically respond to this for 6 to 9 months before they recur. And so we see this dramatic recurrence, and upon recurrence, which again, I said it's like a 90% rate, we have no standard of care. So we sort of go to our only other 3 FDA approved treatment options, and all of them unfortunately are pretty toxic. So we have Avastin that we talked about, bevacizumab. We have a drug called lomustine. And when we have a drug, we also will use temozolomide again, and this time we use it at higher dose levels. Sometimes the neurosurgeon will decide to radiate the patient. And at this point, really what we're doing is mostly palliative. And unfortunately, it's really toxic. So, I've seen majority of patients that go through lomustine therapy, for instance, develop really bad peripheral neuropathy, so nerve pains. There's this really, it's a really unfortunate trajectory. So now what we have, since we've shown the ability to treat the most resistant cancers, this is where we can enter in one way, right? We've shown through our preclinical data that we can overcome resistance to therapeutics like bevacizumab. But more importantly, we want to position our solution eventually to become a first-line therapeutic to prevent that issue. And so we hope that we can prevent this problem completely. And obviously that would be a huge benefit because that translates into a durable outcome, right? And an improved survival. But the other thing we do is, I mentioned, we synergize with things like radiation. So we showed preclinically that we can reduce the required amount of radiation. Radiation is really hard on someone. I've seen that the patients have a really tough time with it. So not only do we think that we can help solve the problem of this, this development of this recurrence, but we also hope we can really improve quality of life. First of all, because we have an excellent safety profile with our target, but also strategically combining it with the other therapies that do give benefit as well, and not having to dose patients to that level where they have all the side effects.
Excellent. And, what do you see as the biggest challenges lying ahead for you?
So I think, the biggest challenge that we always worry about is what we call the valley of death. And so where really great therapies go to die. And so it's the truth. We have to, there's fundraising is not an easy process. And so what we're really committed to and proactively doing through a strategic and aggressive fundraising campaign is getting through that and making sure that this therapeutic reaches its full potential and reaches patients. On a more granular level, I think we need to make sure that we really, really successfully execute the clinical trial design. I think another challenge that we'll face is we need to scale the business and scale the team. And it's not, I have such amazing, I have 3 women that work for me full time, and then we have also expert collaborators and consultants as a part of our team. But I couldn't have found better women or better team members. They would run into a burning building to help patients, but I have to find those same key values as characteristics in our next 3 key senior hires that we want to make with this funding. And it's not easy to find people who share your goals, your mission, and your passion. And finally, I think the last thing I'll say is that we're going to make sure our drug is fully manufactured for phase 1, but we have to start manufacturing again mid to late Q2 2021. And manufacturing is always a challenge. Everybody, there's timelines, it's a lot of money, so you put a lot into the contract negotiation process, and it can lead to a lot of delays. So that's something that we always keep our eye on, and making sure we can meet demand, because when this drug reaches clinic, we expect great outcomes, and when we have great outcomes, we want to be able to continue. So those are some of the upcoming challenges.
Excellent. Excellent. So we've covered a lot of things in a short amount of time. Thank you for watching the Lowdown on Cancer presented by the Cancer Fund. To learn more about what's coming in future episodes, visit us at www.cancerfund.com. While you're there, check out past episodes and be sure to click join us to become a member of the Cancer Fund community. As a member of the community, you'll receive early access to new interviews as well as other announcements. Make sure to connect to all of our social media channels so you don't miss a thing. In addition to getting early access to new episodes of the Lowdown on Cancer, Cancer Fund members play a critical role in driving cancer innovation forward so that one day we can more than hope. We can actually beat cancer. Thank you for joining us on this journey.